Good afternoon and welcome back to Tactics Board, perhaps the most important one of the season so far. It is the big day coming up, Ipswich Town versus Norwich City, the game many fans have had circled on their calendars for months now since the fixtures were released in the summer, and the build-up has well and truly started. The pressure is on, but Norwich go into it with a bit of momentum, having beaten Sheffield Wednesday 3-1. Of course, in midweek. They've had a fairly decent run of results, aside from that 0-0 draw with Preston, which many supporters felt they probably should have won. They won 3 out of 4 games before that, so they have now won 4 out of 6, lost only one of those, and there were positive signs at Carrow Road when the Owls visited. So I'm going to take a look at how I expect the game to pan out tactically and guide you through the 11 I think David Wagner will choose for the game. So without further ado, here is the 11 I think he'll select. I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Shane Duffy and Kenny McLean at centre back, Dimitris Yannoulis at left back, a midfield two of Marcelino Nunez and Gabriel Sara, with Jonathan Rowe on the right, Borja Sainz on the left, and Ashley Barnes slightly behind Adam Eder. In goal, it's Angus Gunn, and I think he's probably an important figure to talk about going into this one because he's one of only 2 in that predicted 11 that have actually played in an East Anglian derby before. He's probably somebody who understands what it means, and given how long it's been since the last one, obviously well over 4 years now, it's probably important that you do have a couple of people in there that understand really what it means. Speaking to fans in and around Carrow Road in the last couple of weeks, they've, without even being prompted, spoken about that game, and you can tell how important it is. A couple of them have also suggested that maybe this squad won't understand totally what it means, and I do understand that argument. There are obviously a lot of players who aren't even from this country that won't really understand the atmosphere as much, although Christian Fastnack did speak in his programme interview about how players have been talking about it and telling him about how important it is, and from how Wagner spoke about it as well, there does seem to be a good level of anticipation and excitement for the game, if not maybe within the fan base, given Ipswich's form. But Gunn is somebody who definitely understands that, having obviously played in it in the 2017-18 season twice, another unbeaten season for Norwich in that derby. Of course, they won one and drew one in dramatic fashion. He only conceded 1 goal in those 2 games, so hopefully he can carry that form forward. I don't think he had the best game against Sheffield Wednesday. Arguably could have come and claimed the ball for that Wednesday goal. Doesn't really look that much of a presence in his box, to be honest. He pulls off some decent saves, but other than that, I thought he struggled a little bit. I've been a big fan of his, and I think in terms of stopping what looked like certain goals, he's the best keeper Norwich have had for a while, but he doesn't really have that commanding presence. And in a game where tensions are going to be high, there might be some balls chucked into the box. If Ipswich don't have the result that they're hoping for towards the end of the game, you probably want someone with a bit more of that presence. So hopefully Gunn can find that within himself a little bit, but his experience in these sorts of games will definitely help. At right back, I've gone for Jack Stacey, the only change I've gone for from Wagner's 11 for the Sheffield Wednesday game, and that's largely because of how well Norwich performed. I know they were against a very relegation threatened team, and one that you'd definitely expect to beat, but I thought especially in the second half that was the best they've played for a long while. And of course Stacey was the difference between that fairly stodgy, inconsistent first half and the very proactive second half. Also, a lot of players obviously improved their performances, but I think Wagner will look at that and see that change and see how important it was. I think Fisher struggled physically. This game looks like it could be even more physical, not just because of the derby situation, but also because Ipswich have a lot of those players in forward areas and wide areas, so that could have been a problem with him in there. I did get the sense when Fisher was starting that it was a bit of a rest for Stacey anyway, to be honest, but I think the second half just helped affirm the fact, to be honest, that Wagner will probably choose him for the derby. So I've got Stacey at right back. At centre back, I've gone for Duffy and McLean, and I'll come on to this later, but a problem that Norwich will really face is the amount of space that Ipswich managed to create in the opposition half. That's through moving the ball really, really quickly in their own half to then get it in there. They get around a press really well, draw in teams, and then have loads and loads of space in the opposition half when they want to attack. They move the ball really, really quickly and do that really well. And their players probably could have sort of 3 or 4 seconds on the ball if they didn't move it so quickly. That's how much space they managed to find in the opposition half, and that's probably where Kenny McLean is a positive compared to a lot of the other experienced centre halves that Wagner likes to choose. Jayden Warner probably would help in that situation, but we've seen how little Wagner's used him this season, so it seems unlikely he'd chuck him in for a derby, and Duffy seems to be an absolute guarantee on the team sheet. So I'd expect those two to go in there. Admittedly, George Hurst is probably a bit more of a physical threat, and again, that could be an issue that McLean struggles with. I think he struggled a little bit with that against Sheffield Wednesday, although I thought every other facet of his game was absolutely excellent, to be honest. So I think he has earned that right to play in that centre-back role without too much questioning, but just tactically I question it in terms of the physicality. However, as I said, in terms of the movement, closing down spaces, being a bit more athletic and being able to react to things quickly, that's where he probably shines ahead of the likes of Bart, Duffy, even maybe Hanley when he comes back from injury. But I expect Duffy to be in there as well. That could be an issue, when you look at his strengths and weaknesses and the way that Ipswich attack and those strengths that they've got that I talked about. That could be a real problem for him. But equally, if Norwich do sit back in their sort of block and refuse to give Ipswich that bait or give into the bait, of going into the press in the Ipswich half and then leaving that space in their own half, that could actually suit them, and that seems like the game plan Wagner has returned to fairly often for comfort. So that actually could work. I've been fairly critical of it, but I think in this situation against a really top team who thrive on moving the ball quickly and finding space in your half, that could be where Norwich find a little bit of strength and where the likes of Duffy don't need to do the things that they're uncomfortable with, such as coming up to the halfway line, leaving space in behind them, having to duel not just physically but in terms of pace with the sort of attackers that Ipswich have in that half. They have a lot of very nimble, very clever movers in that team, and that could be a problem if Norwich give in to the Ipswich bait. But I think they will counteract that by going a bit more secure, probably not really pressing very actively from the front, and defending mainly in their own half, and that could suit the likes of Duffy. But I think McLean will help with dealing with that movement that Ipswich have, and hopefully limit that effectiveness from an Ipswich point of view. On the left, Dimitris Giannoulis, who is probably going to be the outball for Norwich at times if they do decide on that sort of defensive setup. He's quite often played that role, and I think it's had mixed success this season. He's had periods of looking really, really good and consistently very good. He's had periods of looking quite poor, and then periods of inconsistency, which I'd suggest he's in right now. I think he's struggled to make his mark on certain games. I didn't think he looked amazing against Sheffield Wednesday. Equally, I don't think he looked very poor, but he didn't face much of a threat in an attacking sense. He has struggled defensively, so you'd suggest he might be the weak link in that sense, as well as Stacey, who hasn't looked especially good positionally defensively. I think in terms of timing his tackles and battling with people, he's quite good, but positionally he's struggled. Giannoulis is more of the other type. He seems to understand it a little bit better positionally, but he switches off at times and he does struggle physically against strong presences. So that might be where there's a problem for him, especially given the aggressive nature of Ipswich's fullbacks and wing-backs that can really hurt you down the side. So that might be a problem for Norwich, but just given how important he is to the build-up play, and we've seen McLean dropped from his regular midfield position into defence purely because of that, so we know how important the build-up is for Wagner. That probably is why Giannoulis is so important to him, and probably why he starts in the derby. I just also think he's the best left-back Norwich have by some distance. To be honest, not really a Wagner player when you look at the other types of players that he's got in there, but a very good player for this level when he can sort of get to it. So hopefully the derby motivates him a little bit to get there, and he can produce the sort of top performance we have seen this season and pretty much all seasons that he's had at the club, to be honest. In midfield, I've gone for Gabriel Sara and Marcelino Nunez, and that might not feel like a particularly secure defensive one, and I suppose that might come into Wagner's thinking, but they've both had pretty good sort of months in the last couple of weeks. I think Marcelino Nunez has been turning out some of his most consistent performances in a Norwich shirt. Wagner used to criticise him for giving the ball away a little bit too often, being a bit careless in possession, and I think we have all seen that at times. He does tend to try sometimes Hollywood passes or tries to be a bit too clever, sort of on the edge of his own box and give it away in key areas, but he's improved on that. I think he finds players more often. He looks a bit more energetic and a bit more up for it than maybe he has at times, and you could understand that tiredness. But I think we're seeing the same level of energy and optimism from his performances that we were when he first arrived at the club. So I think Nunez has probably earned a start in the derby. Obviously, tactically, I worry about that a little bit with him as a sort of number 6 in what could be quite a physical and hectic game. So far in the recent games, they've been playing against teams that aren't going to offer much of a direct threat, really. Preston tried to play directly, but they weren't committing too many players to attacking. So this is probably by far the most attacking threat Norwich will face since he's come into the team, and that probably should be considered. But I think based on his performances in recent weeks, Nunez probably does deserve a start. And Sarah, we know why he's in the team. He's the key man. He's the most talented in that team, the most likely to produce a moment, even with the likes of John Rowe and Borja Sainz, who I'm obviously going to come on to. And on Derby Day, when Norwich have struggled in recent years, you look back at that 2017-18 year that I mentioned, especially back to that 1-0 win or 1-1 draw, with Ipswich in the 2018-19 season, when it felt like Ipswich were really on their way to a Derby Day victory. It has been those individual moments. So perhaps with such a gulf in the team, Gabriel Sara could come alive and produce one of those moments. He's also, I think, improving his defensive side of the game. He's in the right place at the right time more often, and although that means he doesn't get to be in the advanced positions a lot of people want to see him in as often as he maybe could be, it does mean that he can contribute more effectively to Wagner's tactical system, and obviously he's a key player to this team, so you'd expect to see him in midfield. On the right, I've gone for Jonathan Rowe, who didn't have his best game against Sheffield Wednesday, but did still produce a goal, and that is what those players are in that team for. Yes, you do want to see him combining effectively with the fullback and helping build attacks, but that's not really what this Norwich team is based on, to be honest. It's based on, from Wagner's ideals, defensive solidity and then individual moments a lot of the time. We saw one of those from Rowe with a diving header to seal the game against the Owls on Wednesday. We saw one of those from Borja Sainz, who I'm going to come on to. But just based on the quality of Rowe, the counter-attacking abilities, when Norwich are probably going to be tempted to try and base themselves in a more defensive structure, that will tempt Wagner into starting him, in my opinion. So I've gone for Jonathan Rowe on the right. On the left, I've just mentioned him, and after that first start, surely he can't drop Borja Sainz. I did say I wasn't going to predict him to be in the 11 until I saw it. Again, I didn't expect to see him starting against Sheffield Wednesday, but that was the choice Wagner made, and it paid off after just 7 minutes. A fantastic turn from Sainz after a good pass from McLean, and then drives it right into the top corner, and he underlines so quickly what Norwich fans have been hoping for from him. Hopefully he can continue to produce that, and that was the moment actually when I thought, okay, Norwich are going into this derby as significant underdogs, and Ipswich are the better side when you look at the table, but those are the sorts of moments that might dig Norwich out of a hole, might just keep their unbeaten run in the East Anglian derby going for a little bit longer. If somebody like a Sainz or a Rowe can produce those goals that we've seen from them at times this season, then that might dig them out of a significant hole. And he went and produced it again, a great moment in the second half, really early on, obviously, for the second goal Norwich scored in that game. A fantastic burst of pace, then set up Ashley Barnes with a perfectly weighted low cross with the outside of his right foot, and just underline what he can do. He's not especially involved, and I don't think any of us were really expecting him to be a sort of Emi Buendia type that's always on the ball, always wanting the ball, but when he does get on it in the final third, he really comes alive and has the quality to produce, probably higher quality than in the Championship. And it's a good thing Wagner has stumbled upon this strength going into the derby, because I think he could be the sort of player that really rescues it for Norwich if they can manage to do it. And then I've got Ashley Barnes, who missed 2 absolute sitters, a couple of other good chances before scoring, but he did get that goal that will give him a little bit of momentum going into the derby. I think he's been more involved in recent fixtures than he was before that. Going back to the QPR game when he returned from injury, I was very critical of his performance, and I think that was fair because he didn't produce a lot. He wasn't very involved, and the only things people could really highlight positively were those intangibles of experience and leadership and knowing what it takes to get a game over the line. And I've been open about the fact that I don't think that's a policy to really go on to put players in your team just for those qualities. They need to be producing technically, tactically, physically, and he has done that a little bit more in recent games. He's been much more involved, and as the cliche goes, it's better to be in those positions and missing chances than to not get in those positions at all. And he got in those positions a number of times against, admittedly, one of the worst defences in the league. But you'd suggest off the basis of that momentum, he seems to be forging a bit of a better partnership with Ida. One of those chances came from a pass into the Irishman that he miscontrolled a little bit, but then left to Barnes, and he obviously smacked the underside of the bar. So those two are working a little bit better together. Barnes is a bit more involved, so I'd suggest he's probably done enough to be involved in that derby, and he has obviously been involved in significant derbies as well, Burnley and Blackburn and others in his career, and he is probably the sort of player, as much as I don't want to push those cliches too much about intangibles, in a derby that does make a little bit more difference, and I think he's probably done enough to earn a place in the team for that, as has Adam Ida, who again didn't score but held the ball up really well. He's getting a lot better at that, at bringing other players into play, and when he's feeding on scraps, as strikers often find themselves in when you're playing a defensive system, as Wagner sort of has chosen to in recent weeks, and probably over a longer period of time when he's had the opportunity, then you have to be able to hold the ball up well and bring others into play. Ida's done that really well. He seems to be forging a bit of a partnership with Barnes. Not too many chances being created for him, although he probably should have scored a header from a pretty decent Unilis cross in the first half, and that's an area of his game he needs to get better at. When you look at his size, his presence, his height, he should be scoring more often from headers. He should be getting on the end of crosses more often, let alone finishing them. But that doesn't seem to be his strength. So maybe that's something Norwich will work on. But in the short term, I think he's done enough to secure a start for this game. And of course, we'll have every kick covered from Portman Road at pinkun.com and on the Pinkun Plus app. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe for all of our build-up coverage, and then our analysis afterwards, which hopefully Norwich can produce a decent result so you can enjoy a bit more of that. But it's £3 for 3 months, so you'll get plenty more than just the derby, and it's only in December, so take advantage of that deal while you can. pinkun.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining me on Tactics Board, and I'll see you again soon, hopefully after a positive result at Portman Road.